This is your host, Tim Winders, coming to you from the passenger seat of our RV Theo. And let me just go ahead and tell you, as of recording today, it is a nice, toasty, warm day. I was joking around with our guests before we hit record that I had to turn off the AC, and it's getting a little bit warm in here. But we're going to have a great conversation. Before I get to the conversation, I just want to continually encourage all of you to have conversation with us. Do that on all of our socials. Join us there. Join us on, let's see, we're Instagram. We are on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. We are also on Clubhouse. Don't do a lot there, but we're also on Clubhouse. And we're also on YouTube. And so thanks for joining us on whatever platform you consume us. And then, of course, the big one, all the podcast platforms. So thankful that you're here. Glad that you're here. And with that, let's go ahead and dive in, because we're going to have a fun conversation today with someone that I was just telling them, I love doing the podcast because I get to meet people that I may not have ever met were it not for this. Today, we have Bobby Albert as our guest. He is the CEO and president of Values Driven Leadership, LLC, a consulting firm focused on helping Christian leaders build inspiring workplace cultures driven by their core values. He's a lifelong entrepreneur, and I look forward to hearing a story that's going to go back to the 70s. I've read portions of his book, and so we're going to go back to the 70s and talk about I think a pretty impactful story that impacted his leadership. He started 12 different businesses and acquired 9 others. His approach to business has been to value people, seek wisdom, embrace humility, and never stop learning. Bobby, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Well, thank you. And it's such a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah,
and my accent probably is giving where I'm from away. So,
well, so here's the deal here. I'm originally from Georgia, but as I started kind of going out and about, I made efforts to, lessen my accent. I don't know why, but first of all, I don't think we're going to need a translator. But secondly, by the end of this, I may be talking kind of like you, Bobby. So for the audience, just hang with us. It's going to be awesome. So, hey, Bobby, first question I like to ask is, I've got the bio. You've got such a rich background, so many things we could have talked about. In fact, we even try to compress those so they don't get too long when we first get started having a conversation. But if you and I just bumped into each other, this first question I like to ask, and I ask you, what do you do? What do you typically tell people when someone asks you that question?
Well, that's an excellent question, Tim. I come beside Christian business leaders to encourage them to integrate the Lordship of Jesus Christ into every area of their life. And that would include your family, your church. But most of all, I want to help Christian business leaders about seeing how to develop their culture in the workplace, but also in the marketplace.
That's good. There's a lot of good words there. Just like when I was reading your bio, there were some words, values and things like that. But the first thing I want to ask, and I'm really, what I like to do, Bobby, is I kind of like to put myself in the seat of a possible listener and why they would click onto a podcast when they hear a conversation about leadership, and especially values driven leadership. And you mentioned the first word was encourage. And so I want us to assume something here, that there may be someone listening in that may not be at 100%. Let's just say that they may have low energy. They may have felt beaten up, especially over the last 12 to 18 months. They may have been in a role that seemed like things were going well and now it doesn't. And they just really need a little bit of that word encourage. How do you typically go about doing that? And I'm kind of asking in the question, I'm asking the question in a way that almost for you to speak into the mic and say, hey, I want to encourage you. So just let's go ahead and start off with that. Encourage us.
Well, you know, if I can maybe share a story. When I was 20 years old, life was good. I mean, really good. I just graduated from our local university. I became engaged to marry my wife. Life was indeed very good. But there is one evening I will never forget. I was playing foosball with my college buddies when a friend came up to me and said, Bobby, your dad's in the emergency room. He's had a heart attack. So we rushed to the hospital, and upon seeing me, my mom quickly got up as our family doctor was walking toward us. And he drew in a deep breath and said, I couldn't save him.
Hmm.
My mom and I were absolutely stunned. In an instant, I became the leader of our small 5-employee business. Soon I discovered we were heavy in debt, and all that debt was short term. In other words, due less than a year. And hey, this is the tough part. Our debt was about the same as our total gross revenue. Not good. Financially, we were way upside down. I was in crisis mode every day, just like you were sharing a minute ago, is that we're all experiencing today with all of these challenging health and economic times, and even along with, the hurt and unrest that's going on in our country. And however, we survived, then thrived, and ultimately grew to over 150 employees. And I was able to eventually sell our company to a publicly traded company. And I tell you what, through those tough times, that if you're experiencing tough times right now in your business, I've learned that everyone can build a successful life and business, or even a church, by applying certain principles and practices in their life and business.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Bobby, because I read portions of your book, I think the True North book, and one of the things that I wanted to discuss was that moment back in the early 70s that you were thrust into a leadership role. I love you actually wrote about it and then you shared it. So there's significance for that moment for you, if you recall exactly what you were doing, that you were playing foosball. Because typically, you were playing games, you were at the frat house, you were just hanging out. No, you were playing foosball. And one thing that's interesting, it probably every time you step to a foosball table or you see one, or I don't even know if you can play it anymore. Sometimes those traumatic things happen. It's like, I can't ever play that again. But I think it goes to how I talk about this quite often. And I think you may know on this podcast, we talk about redefining success and what success really means. And we really try to integrate that into leadership and business and ministry. And Bobby, I'd like to go ahead and dive into that story, because even though it's been a long time, I do think that when you look at the trajectory of your life, that was a significant day. I'm not saying it was a great day. You lost your father, but it was a significant day because you went from, we could probably say young man, boy, whatever, to a man very quickly. But what are some other, I don't know if emotions are the right word, but can you think back? But the reason why I want to go into a little bit deeper on this, Bobby, is because I think it's part of the leadership story. Most people that move into, we'll call it significant leadership roles, it's not just this nice, easy peasy, track. So, I mean, can you recall any of the other things going through your mind then? And I'm going to dig a little bit on this because I think it's significant. Let's walk through a few things. What were you, I mean, life was great. You're about to get married. You were having fun. You probably thought you'd work in the company for a while and maybe down the road do something with it. And now you're the boss. First, do you have any siblings? And I'm curious, how old was your father at the time?
Well, he was 57 years old.
That's my age. That's exactly my age. Hmm.
Yeah. And, but
Very
I tell
young.
you, yeah, there was a couple of things that happened during that time. Uh, I, prior to that date, my, I worked in the business,
Hmm.
and my dad actually started the business in 1938, and he grew it from a furniture upholstery and refinishing business to a moving and storage, a glamorous business,
Yeah.
And the I remember when I was in junior high school, some places maybe call middle school. My dad let me go out on my first moving job. Now, let me just say this: prior to that, I was one of those fortunate people to be able to hang out with my dad a lot.
Mhm.
I mean, I knew who the bankers were, who the people that handle our insurance, the people that repaired the trucks. Back then, we had full service gasoline stations. If you can, I can't even hardly think that way anymore. But I knew the people that put the gasoline in the trucks. But when I was 12 years old, my dad let me go out on my first moving job. And he gave me some wise advice right before I went out. He said, "Now, Bobby, when you go out there, I don't want you to act like the boss's son." Now, I don't know, I can't explain why, but somehow at 12 years old, I knew exactly what he meant. And so when I went out there, I took on the servant role,
Mm.
not the boss's son. And I mean, I would do the kind of work on the job that no one really liked to do. Uh, I would run between the truck and the house, and the house and the truck. They used to kid me because I would take one break to their two, and I didn't smoke. They were smoking back then, and I would chew gum, and so they would always say, "We're going to have a chewing gum break." So, but when my father died, a couple of things that was really challenging. One is when we discovered about our debt and our revenue.
Mm.
My dad somehow, I don't know quite explain why, but he had three bankers, and two of them wanted to shut us down, and one of them wanted to give me a chance. And somehow that one banker convinced the other two to give me a chance. And I even had to sell my personal car to pay down some of the debt. And so, fortunately, one of the employees there drove by where I lived every day. And I asked that gentleman, would he mind picking me up every morning and taking me home every night? And you know what? He did that for 2 years, which is hard to believe. But he was a close friend of my dad. One thing about my dad that I learned from him, he really took care of his people. I mean, really took care of them. And they loved him to death. They would jump over the moon for him. And, but one of the toughest things, you got to realize I'm 20 years old. I needed to ask these five employees to take a pay cut. Now, you can just imagine today, if you went to your employee and said, we need to take a pay cut, it's not going to be a happy day. And I tell you what, at 20 years old, I never I never had to do anything that challenging before. And I mean, I met with each one-on-one. I mean, I was shaking, my lips were shaking. I was a nervous wreck. But I tell you what, you know what surprised me? I got 100% acceptance to the pay cut. I mean, that almost seems
So,
impossible.
so that's unique. Now, do you think, I love that you said you moved into a servant role, and I love I don't even know, metaphor or the example of you're thrust in the leadership role, but you sold your personal car and you're asking for a ride from someone who is an employee of yours. So, so I think one of the things I'd love to know, obviously you didn't come into this role with a cockiness that a lot of 20-year-olds would. And I don't know if that was because it was the makeup of Bobby or if it was the situation or a combination of the two. Do you have any insight on that? I mean, was it, I mean, I'm sure there was a shock that you were all of a sudden in this role, but let's just say it hadn't been the unfortunate circumstance of your dad passing. Do you think you would have still had that humility that you did, or did a combination of the whole events really bring out that servant and humility role?
Well, these 5 employees, I worked side by side, some of them since I was 12 years old, not all of them. And so they knew my work ethic. At the university, they knew my reputation because I was the president of student body. And so I had a lot of credibility, but I wasn't necessarily playing on that. I was just focused on what's the right thing we need to do here.
Right.
And so, but I think because of how it's not what I had to say about taking the pay cut, it was the how. Even though I was a nervous wreck, I handled the how well enough that they accepted, which I mean, I was nervous. I'm thinking I'm going to mess up their lifestyle, and, but I think they had so much respect, mainly for my dad, that they were willing to work with me. And I tell you what, these 5 employees and a lot of other people outside of our business came beside me and really helped me, encouraged me and helped me. And within 1 year, we had increased our revenue by 252%. And we had the highest profit in the history of that business. Well, after that happened, all of a sudden, the bank started working with me. And see, prior to that, when they wanted to shut us down, they weren't going to loan me any more money, which you can probably understand.
Yeah.
And so I had to just operate out of cash flow. And that's the reason why it was just a very struggling time. But Tim, if I may come back to this servant leader's role, I didn't understand that back then. But over the years, this goes back into the 80s, I took to help maybe share a thought for your audience that they could maybe use in their own business, is that we had the traditional organization chart, like me at the top and, leadership team and all the way down. So people understood roles and responsibilities. But, the thought I had in my mind was, Jesus said to his disciples, I come to serve and not be served. So with that thought in the background is that I took the organization chart and turned it upside down and displayed it to our employees. We had the traditional one, but I turned it upside down and I was at the bottom. And I had the responsibility to serve I took on the responsibility to serve, equip, and to develop the leadership team. They knew it was their responsibility to equip and serve, supervisors and just all the way up to the frontline employees. But one thing that was very clear to our employees is the customer was at the top of the organization chart. But let me share this with you. Also, because Colossians 3, chapter 3, verses 23 and 24 was the foundation of the culture of our company. And at the very, very top of the organization chart was Jesus Christ.
And I love you bringing that up because it kind of leads into the next question I have. There's a lot of conversation, and we've discussed it quite often with various guests on the podcast. And sometimes we go down a spiritual path, sometimes it's practical business and all that. But we love marrying the two together here. Some people will use the term a Christian business or a Christian company. And then, Bobby, some people argue that a company can't be a Christian company. Individuals can be followers of Christ, but the organizations can't be. I mean, it could have a lot of people in there that follow, but I guess I want to ask you, since you led right into it, did you define your business as a Christian business? Was it a business that was based on Christian principles and values? Was it a business that was made up of people that were followers of Christ that just happened to use a lot of values? How would you distinguish or discern or discuss when someone says, well, this is a Christian company, or no, you can't have a Christian company? Talk a little bit about that, because I'd love to get people's input about that.
Yeah. Hey, that is a great question. Let me just share this with you, is that I was finding Christian business people were living their life in compartments. In other words, the mindset is that, well, because I went out and visited with 50 Christian, business leaders in my community that I knew they were active in their church. And I was trying to share with them all the things that how our culture was blossoming but it was shocking to me. I was really taken back, but the message was always the same. Basically, they would say, Bobby, what I do in business is business, and what I do at church is church. Well, it broke my heart, because see, in my mind, when I read scripture, there is no division between the sacred and the secular. And I find that a lot of Christian business leaders have lacked the connection between Sunday and Monday and for the rest of the week. And God is glorified when we use the talents, the skills, when we use that He has given us, when we use those well, even at our place of business and our leadership role, is that He is glorified when that happened. Now, let me just share this, is that we didn't go out and promote that, hey, we're a Christian business or we didn't do that. But internally, it started out in 1987, in the spring of 1987, I declared that I wanted to see my work as a ministry and not a job that I went to every day. And at first, I'll be honest with you, it's like, okay, Lord, I've declared it. What does it mean? And one Sunday, I at that time, and I did for over 30 years, I taught high school boys, most of the time 12th grade boys in our Sunday school. And I was looking at this Bible study I was presenting, and I was thinking, man, adults need to know this. So I started, it was purely volunteer. I started a weekly Bible study. And it surprised me how many employees showed up. Now, I don't, even when the time I sold the company, I didn't know who was a Christian or not, but I, people love working and how we really cared about our employees. Now, if Tim, if if I can go back to that Colossians 3:23-24, if I might share something
Sure.
there.
Yeah, let's go ahead. In fact, if you got it, if you may have it memorized, go ahead and share what it is so that the listener knows, because
Okay.
there's 2 or 3 other questions that are rolling around, but I want you to finish up that and then we're going to bounce around a little bit on that.
All right. Well, eh, the verse, it starts out, it says, whatever you do. Now, in my mind, that's exactly what it says. Whatever you do. So, in other words, if you're at work, or if you're at the convenience store, or if you are walking, in Walmart or Target, or even if you're out on a soccer field, or you're watching your kid baseball, your kids play baseball or something. It's whatever you do, it says, it goes on to say, work at it with all of your heart.
Mm.
Now, to me, and by the way, our employees heard me review these 2 verses at least 4 times a year when we'd have company-wide meetings.
Mm.
And but to me, working at it with all your heart is excellence. For me, is an all-time thing, not a sometime thing. And then it goes on, it says, as working for the Lord, not men. In other words, our employees clearly heard me say that they came to work for the Lord Jesus Christ every day, not for Bobby Albert.
Mm.
And so then it goes on to say, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. In other words, our employees clearly understood when they came to work every day, they came to work for a much, much higher purpose than just to get a paycheck.
Yeah. All right, that's good. I appreciate you sharing that, because what I heard was that when you're interviewing a new employee, you don't ask them about their spiritual and all that. You can't do that kind of stuff. And so you're not weeding people out based on their belief system, correct?
Well, hey, that's a good question. For the longest time, we didn't do that. And we never did say, hey, are you a Christian or not? We never did go
Sure.
that far. But what we would, our human resource director, he would, when he'd, a prospective employee
Uh-huh.
that we were pretty serious about, he would share with them. He said, now look, here's our core values. This is what we stand for. And you need to know that our CEO is a very strong Christian man.
Yeah.
And would ask that employee, is that, are you going to feel comfortable working for somebody like that?
Right. So it wasn't a condition, but they need to understand the culture, which, listen, I think people need to understand the culture and the values of an organization, even if they don't say they have any. They need to understand it before they go work there. So I think there's value there. But I've had some people that have, you can kind of tell, I've had this conversation with a few folks that have said, well, how do you guarantee that have nothing but Christians working there? I said, how do you guarantee that you've got nothing but Christians in a church?
Yeah.
Truthfully, you know what I mean? You can't. Or that, your kids are, none of that. I think you just set a standard of excellence, which I love what you talked about. Now, the second direction I want to go back to what you said about compartmentalizing, because this is something I've meditated and spent a lot of time on because of myself and because of what I see with clients and people that I work with. And Bobby, I think one of the things that I've noticed is it's kind of the culture of America, first world, that we came from the Greek Roman culture historically, instead of that Jewish, your life is all one, everything just merges together. And to me, I'm going to kind of throw you a big softball, lob you a big question here. To me, that is one of the biggest challenges in leadership in general, politics and business and everything. And that is because people, I'm going to throw out another big word, hypocrite. I think you're a hypocrite if you're something in one place and you're something else somewhere else. So, let's go big, talk big leadership all the way up to, we don't have to name names, but people running countries and all that. To me, we have a lot of hypocrites because, and I'm using that word strongly for a purpose. Hypocrite to me is when someone in one setting says something, does something, acts a certain way, but then somewhere else they don't do that. So how about that softball? See if you could swing for the fences with that.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because my third book that I publish is called The Freedom Paradox.
Mm.
And what I tell you what, for years, it's about our country. And for years, I kept saying, well, when I get around to it, you could have given me, I don't know if you've ever seen them, those little wooden round tuits, you could have given me one. I've got one in my drawer, just to remind me. And but let me just share this with you. One day, it was May 20th of 2015. I was having my daily quiet time that morning, and I came to this verse, and it's 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 16. And what it said is that live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover up for evil, but living as servants of God. Now, I you know how the Lord can speak to you? That was one time, I mean, it shook me to the core.
And then also there's another thing to it. And I know you've read through the Bible and scriptures probably multiple times like I have, and like a lot of people listening. There are times when a certain scripture will jump off the page in a different way. It'll pierce your heart, your soul in a different way than it ever has. And it sounds like that one did it at that time.
Yeah. And I've had God's word speak to me before. But this was significant. And it was like the Lord was saying, Bobby, it's time for you to write this book. So the book, what I did, which is interesting to me, is that these leadership principles and practices that I have applied in our business, I was applying it to our country. About how the book really talking about encouragement. It's really it's helping us understand how we can reunite our country, because there's just kind of like you're talking about. I've thought about this. I wish I could. I thought about this someday. I may have you mentioned the word sick and tired. Well, I am sick and tired of the lying, the hypocrites, the false, doctrine, the half truths. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, and so that I'm clear, I'm not speaking about, especially in the United States, we've got people other places, but
I understand.
I'm not speaking about one political party or the other. I lump them all together. Yes. When I say that, and I think you do too, right?
Yes, I do, because not every, there's people in the United States on both parties have got some issues.
Yep.
People are people, that kind of makes me think our chief operating officer, sometimes there'd be something that really got messed up in our company, and it was caused by an employee. And he would come in with his head down, and he's a real strong Christian. I used to call him Barnabas because he was a big encourager all the time. Anyway, and he would say, people, But see, that was our values driven, that was our values statement, our company value statement, people, people, people.
Mm.
And so anyway, is you're exactly right. But what I found I started researching, and I was reading stories about the founding of our country. And of course, when the Mayflower came over and all those kind of way even further back. And there was a couple of things that really stood out. And if we look at the core values, what I found in the core values was freedom and responsibility.
Mm.
And I think we all understand the value of freedom. I mean, we understand that here in America. But where we are slipping right now is the responsibility side.
Mm.
And that's the paradox, is that what I was learning, and I was reading history that I hadn't read since I was in high school, and but what I was learning was that the founding core values was freedom and responsibility. Well, the paradox is that as we behave more irresponsible, the more freedoms we lose.
Mm.
Conversely, the more we behave responsibly, the more freedoms we gain.
Wow. So that's so good because it relates to something we're going to unfortunately date this recording a little bit. I'm currently in South Dakota, and right before we hit record, you and I had a brief conversation about the governor of South Dakota, about how she had handled some of the issues related to the pandemic and things like that. But when you mentioned freedom and responsibility, to me, it just, those two words rung so loud in my head. With that is how she seemed, I don't know all the details, but she seemed to approach a difficult situation using that as a foundation, that we want to give people freedom and we're going to make them responsible. There is a virus going around. Be responsible, don't do anything crazy, but we give you the freedom as individuals to do that. And we saw, an example in the country where some leaders said, no, government needs to make all the decisions. And some leaders said, no, we believe people should. And then some did a lot of weird stuff we won't even get into, but I mean, that was kind of the example we were talking about earlier. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. And if I may share this, in my research in the founding of the country,
Mm-hmm.
of America, is I dug deeper into, the freedom part I could get, but the responsibility I wanted to dig into a little bit more. This was the fascinating thing, is that during that time, there was one book that was common in just about every family. That same book was used to educate the students with, and that one book was the Bible. And that, you might ask, well, the question is, well, how did people know how to be responsible? Well, the Bible was taught so deeply within the family and used even in the education system that people generally knew. They had bad actors like we have today,
Sure.
but people generally knew how to be responsible.
Mm.
Now, Tim, if I can maybe share another thing about what I discovered was the
Sure.
purpose of the United States of America, why we exist, is, when the Mayflower came, they came so they could worship freely. That was the reason why they came here. Well, just a couple years later after that, there was another group that came to America. They discovered what we know today as Boston. And they were actually 17 ships and 1,000 people.
Mm.
And you know what? They came so they could worship freely. And so, in other words, the founding of the United States of America was based on why we exist is religious freedom.
Mm.
And I tell you what, that started, those two different groups started this wave of bunches of people coming to the United States of America for that purpose. So that is why we exist. That's our purpose. So the core values is freedom and responsibility, and our purpose, why we exist. These are business essentials in my mind.
Sure.
Was religious freedom, and guess what? It's in the First Amendment.
Yeah. And I think here's something that we could really, and I don't want us to go down this path. You and I would be considered mature males. we don't use the word old here, okay, just so you know. Um, and we would have a tendency, Bobby, to go down this the way things used to be, or things have gotten so bad. And I try so hard not to do that, but yet I do kind of get pulled into it. And so, what I'd love for us to do a little bit, maybe this is going to work a little bit of a muscle for both of us. Where do you see great examples? And we could call it by name or we could just talk in general. Where do you see great examples of freedom and responsibility, or leaders with freedom and responsibility, using that in our current culture, society? And I look a lot beyond the United States, because I think the world has shrunk so much. I think we are still a beacon in many ways, but we lived over in Australia, New Zealand for a few months. And it's so interesting how we pipe out our TV shows and all to those countries, but then we don't really reciprocate and try to learn much about them. I think we could do better in that. That's another topic and all that. But let's talk about freedom, responsibility, and the reason why I'm trying to do this is because I don't want to go down a path of, oh, how bad it is. So let's
Yeah,
talk
no,
about some good examples that we found and can see, so that we can learn from it. And then as we move forward, I'm going to start getting some good tips and pointers for leaders and business owners as we move towards wrapping up here. But let's talk big picture first. What are you seeing that you really like and you love what's going on in either the country or the world?
well, in that book is I speak about four cultural changes that
Mm.
I've been observing for many years, and but just like yours, if I understand what you're saying, there hope is not lost,
Mm-mm.
but it comes. The four cultural changes, and I won't dwell on them deeply, but one of them is what I call principle versus expediency. Another term for expediency is making emotional decisions, not the right decision. And another one is having an abundance mindset instead of a scarcity mindset. Uh, I don't know how to explain it, but ever since I was a little kid, riding my little bicycle in a neighborhood, I've always had an abundance mindset. And I can't even think about, having a scarcity mindset. Another would be is finding root cause to problems, not solving symptoms, or things that make you feel good for the short term. And so uh, if we could get from leaders, we're talking about business principles here, but if they are applied to how we run our country, if we stayed more focused on solving root cause of problems, uh, uh, we would be there is hope. Another one is it's hard to understand the term, but the other is what I call process versus content.
Mm.
And it's, in other words, process is how we say and do things. Content is what you say and do. And we, in our country right now, we're very focused on what we want to say and do, when we want to, how we want to, uh, without responsibility. See, but when you, on the process side, you're focused on the how, and that's building relationships. It's I use a term in the book called, do you want to be a picker upper or a putter downer?
Mhm.
And if we started picking people up, we would, there is hope. There's social media really opened the door to what I used to see on when our boys were younger and playing sports. What they called back then was trash talk.
Mm.
And to me, social media has become the new trash talk. And it's a pretty heavy on putting people down instead of picking them up.
Yeah.
And but see, it comes back to, if we were following our core values, we would take responsibility of picking people up instead of trying to put them down.
Yeah, and what's so great about that? I've actually observed this in myself in the last 12 months, and I'm a guy who's always been, leadership training and positive mindset, all of those things. But I notice that what I consume and where I go to consume it has an impact on my mindset, because I've actually noticed that I can sort of train those algorithms on some of those social media platforms, that if I keep going down a certain path, they're going to feed me more of that, Bobby. But if I say no, I don't want to go down that path. I would rather go down the path of positive, of good stories, cat videos that make me laugh or whatever. You know what I mean? And you know what? I've actually noticed that it is trainable. We'd like to blame them for it, but what they're really doing is they're feeding off of what we allow them to feed off of. So having said that, another big picture question here. Do you see, I've had this discussion with people. We've almost had some arguments about it. So I don't know if you'll argue. I don't know if we'll argue about it, but do you believe that there is hope of unity within a country like the United States? We could talk about almost any other country the same way, because as we're recording this, there's things going on in the Middle East, there's things going on in Europe, there's things going on all over. But let's just look at the United States. Do you see a time that we would all move together similar to what we did maybe after 9/11 in 2001, where at least for about 4 weeks,
Yeah.
people were sort of on the same page? The reason why I bring that up is that I would like to think I see it, because I'm an optimistic guy, but I must admit it's kind of really hard for me to practically envision it. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, man, that's a tough question, but the simple answer is, I do believe we can do it.
Is it spiritual? Is it an answer because of your spiritual foundation?
I think so, because the Lord has uh, blessed me to see things from a spiritual, um, with spiritual eyes.
Mhm.
And on one side of me, I'm sick and tired. You
Mm.
know, I'm like, Lord, what? Surely you're not. This is not. This is not. This. But let me just share this. You got to think about this, because Jesus told us the mission statement of Satan. And he said, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Mhm.
And we're our country at the moment seems to be turning to idols and foreign gods. Um, but there is opportunity for people to uh, that by by sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. In America, to me, it's becoming more ripe all the time for changed hearts. And if we can change hearts, man, whew, no telling what United States America could be again.
Yeah, because there's that foundation there that you mentioned earlier. I actually have seen some things kind of, I think, in the spiritual realm also, that Babylon or that world system is crumbling. But I was reminded that it always has been. It always has been. If you go back to the creation, and that as it crumbles, there's only one place for people to go, and that's the kingdom of God. So our role is to shine and show the kingdom of God. And that's when you say share the gospel, that's the way I translate that. So I love all that. Go ahead. Yeah, what do you have?
Well, I was going to say, if I can come full circle back to about the culture we developed in our company,
Yeah.
is see, it was my objective is to help every employee to become all
Mm.
that God wanted them to be. Now, I realize there's some people there that they weren't Christians, and I know of a couple of people that were of different faith. And of course, I would open up, company-wide meetings with a prayer, and I would go to them in advance and I would say, hey, I'm going to be opening up with a word of prayer. If you want to just stop, go off, step off, somewhere. You're not going to, there's no hard feelings on my part, or if they don't want to, pray with us, I'm okay with that. But what we did, our culture of this work is worship culture was so big, we had to hire an extra person in our human resource department just to manage all the logistics of it. See,
Wow.
what we did, originally it was focused on the workplace, the employees,
Mm.
but we eventually figured out how to minister to customers and suppliers. And
Mm.
because our company was serving, we were relocating 99% of our business was outside of the city that I was in. In other words, we were relocating people from like California to Illinois, from Florida to Virginia, from the state of Washington to the state of Connecticut. We were dealing with tens of thousands of customers. And, but we figured out how to minister, and we had so much business, we couldn't service it. So we call them suppliers, but they really were contractors. They were other moving companies. And we also did international work. But we divided things up between the mind, body, spirit, and we use the term emotions. Now, it wasn't talking about emotional, but we were talking about how to develop appropriate relationships. And there's very practical things that any of your listeners could take away today. It may take me a few minutes to cover a couple of things.
Yeah, you're leading great into what I wanted to do here in our last few minutes. Is I was going to ask if we could go to just some practical things, because one of the things I've noticed, especially in doing interviews like this, speaking to people that have already established something, and what you did, you've had exits, you've acquired companies, but I would love it if you could shift just a little bit to maybe the listener that wants to know how to get started developing that culture, developing some values within their system. And I know there's a lot of steps to it, but I'd love for whoever's listening in to at least get a few starting points to get the ball rolling. And before we wrap up, we'll give some more resources. I know you've got some on your website and things like that that can help. But can we break it down just for the person going, wow, it seems huge to get to that point. How can I just get started? Can you help us with that?
Yes, I'll try to be as quickly as possible. If I take like the mind, now some of these things I'm going to mention, you're going to say, well, that doesn't sound like ministering to people, but we saw it from a spiritual eyes that we were ministering to our employees.
Yeah.
If I could start there first, it's like our business we had peak and non-peak season. And during the winter months was the non-peak season. And we spent a great deal of time training and developing our people. We provided scholarships to the local college, local junior college. We on the body, we had a strong wellness program. See, we would invite the clinic or one of the clinics or the hospital to come in and do just simple things like blood pressure check, cholesterol check, coaching people on, the quit smoking, those kind of things. We also had a weight loss. It was a fun thing. We call it Move It and Lose It. And we do it once or twice a year. Every Friday was a weigh-in, and there were prizes that, for those things. We even paid for gym memberships. On the spiritual side, I already mentioned about Bible study, but I also subscribe to what's called marketplace chaplains. And by the time I sold the company, we had 4 chaplains. They did worksite visit every week. They were on call 24/7. It was all kept confidential. It was for the total family, not just the employee. They did hospital visits, funerals, weddings at no charge to the employees. We had prayer teams that people could submit prayer requests. We pay all the expenses of people, the women that would attend a Women of Faith conference, because they would probably have to travel to go to one. We would buy Christian concert tickets, and people could, we would provide the ones that, were interested in getting those tickets free. Any Christian financial or marriage enrichment workshops locally, we would pay for those expenses. On the emotional side, we had during our peak season, we had what was called Happy Fridays. I love these during the peak season. It was helping our employees deal with the stress because during the peak season, it's a very stressful time. I mean, our leadership team, we would make bets on who would cry first. It was just a tough time. But I would go on these Happy Fridays, I would go and buy snow cones for everybody, or you would find me making banana splits or sundaes for employees, that would come at a Friday afternoon. Typically in July, I'd bring in a couple massage therapists that people could schedule to have that done. Usually in August, I would bring in 2 wrecked cars and give people sledgehammers and let them just beat the heck out of those cars. Hey, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but sometimes they'd be a customer's name on the side of the car because, sometimes.
Now that's not good Christian. That's not good showing love,
is it?
I
know. But these customers were famous because, man, they were not good people. And, but we were in the business. We don't show up on time. We break things, we lose things. I mean, we're just in that business and things happen, but sometimes customers just, man. But, and usually in September at the end of our peak season, I take everybody for bowling and burgers, and we'd have silly prizes like who had the biggest shoe, the loudest thump of their ball, and the best gutter ball, and those kind of things like that. So, but with customers and suppliers, because we dealt electronically and of course verbally about, through a phone system with our customers and suppliers, we had means for them to submit prayer requests. We had a prayer team over those requests. We even, if an employee, when a customer was relocating, long distance is a very stressful time. They put it up there near, experiencing death. But if our coordinators picked up that the customer was just stressed because they're having to, maybe the spouse has already gone ahead to start their work, and, the other spouse is left to, just to manage everything, to get everything moved and things. We partnered with Marketplace Chaplains, and we paid the expense for a chaplain in that city to go visit the customer at their home if it was okay with it. Other things, we were involved with several trade associations, and at the conventions, I worked with the staff of the associations to put on a Movers for Christ prayer breakfast. And of course, one thing that, you was about ready to ask me, but I think the first question I typically get asked, Bobby, is this even legal? And the answer is yes. We, we have the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and there's a couple of federal laws that give us permission to do a lot more than most business leaders even realize. Basically, this is oversimplifying it, but you can just about do whatever you want to do. You can spend your money on whatever you want to do, but there are a few exceptions. One is you cannot require your employees to attend like a Bible study. It's not, you can't require as a condition of your employment.
Right.
Another, and I really would be honest with you, I wouldn't want, if they don't want to be there, I don't want them there anyway,
That's not a fun Bible study. I've been to some that way, by the way. and
is
those
that
aren't
right?
fun.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, come on. Sometimes, growing up as a kid in church and all that, we maybe had a Bible study that we didn't want to be there, or there were other people. And it's like, those aren't usually good Bible studies anyway. You want people to be there.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, if somebody in their workstation wanted to put up a picture of Jesus and some crosses, as an employer, I'm required to accommodate as long as it doesn't disrupt, the business. Yeah. And so those are basically the two things that you can't do. But outside of that, it's kind of common sense. You can do legally, and there's people that I could help getting someone in contact with, attorneys that when somebody has these, has problems, they'll represent them.
Yeah.
And most time they'll do it free.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the nice list you gave us of all of the possibilities that that people can use and implement. I loved, to me, there's a word that kept coming to my mind as you were describing that, and it was the word, and it's pronounced, I've heard it different ways, ecclesia or ecclesia, which is the word that we use for church out of the New Testament, but we've translated it to mean a building that people go to on Sunday. But to me, what you described was the whole person, ministering to everyone that's within your realm, that you have responsibility. I'll go back to the word you used earlier, responsibility over. And to me, that is such a great definition of leadership. I think this is a great place for us to begin wrapping up. I've got one more kind of big question for you. Maybe, I don't know, you may have been asked this before, but if you were to back up and whisper or give some advice or tell 20-year-old Bobby something, knowing what you know now, and because sometimes we get to these places in our lives and, we've learned all this and all this kind of stuff, but knowing what you know now, if you could back up and say, hey, Bobby, 20-year-old Bobby, I want you to make sure of this, or don't do this, or whatever, what would you tell yourself?
Well, that is a big question. And
have you ever thought of it before? You probably have, haven't you?
Well, I've thought about a lot of things. Of course, my head goes too much in the complexity, of answering the question. It's kind of one of these things. There's not a simple answer. And But if I could suggest this, is if you're not, and I wasn't at the time. I mean, I went to church, but it was kind of like I knew a lot about God, but I didn't know God at 20
Mm,
years old. I was one of those people, and I was earning my way to heaven. I was a good person, and I was earning my way to heaven. As you know, that's not the answer, but is uh, get into God's word.
mm,
I, I have found that over time, God's wisdom is a lot better than human wisdom. And I see, this is looking from spiritual eyes,
yeah.
is I see people turning to human reason today when God is right there that wants to help them
Mm,
and reach up and pull them out of the crisis they're in.
yeah. I think I think that's a perfect answer. Not that I was trying to lead you that way, because the older I get, the more I learn, the more whatever experiences, everything becomes narrowed down to relationship with the Father, relationship with Christ, relationship with my Creator. And everything else just seems to be, I'm not saying it's superfluous, I'm not saying it doesn't mean anything, but it's secondary to that. And I truly believe, this is kind of what I heard you say. If you're struggling in a leadership role, business role, or anything like that, that relationship and knowing God, not knowing of God, I love how you said that. That to me is like the secret sauce. Somebody say, "What's the secret?" Bobby just gave you the secret. So, man, Bobby, we could keep talking, especially, telling stories, and you from Texas, me originally from Georgia, but I'm watching our time here, and I know we've got stuff to do. Where can people, because I actually read portions of your book True North and made a lot of notes on it, but we didn't get to any of that. You kind of went into your other book, which I wish I'd read that first. But where can people go to connect with you, to get more information, to find your books? Or I think you've got some assessments for people. Go ahead and verbally give that. We'll include it all in the notes, but go ahead and give that now. And then I've got one more question before we wrap up and finish up.
Okay. It's pretty simple. People can find me at Bobby, Bobby, Albert, ALBERT.com. That's where they can find my website. And there's all kinds of resources there. Now, as far as I do have what I call a cultural assessment tool. There's 15 questions. It doesn't take, it's just simple A and B type of selection. But the link to that culture assessment is bobbyalbert.com/cultural, I'm sorry, culture checkup. bobbyalbert.com/culture checkup.
Yeah, very
And
good.
go
So
ahead.
we'll include that in the notes, because, and I was going to ask, and you can follow up here, is that a good place for people to start?
It would because they can learn a lot about the workplace culture of their business and what their employee. It's something that you want to start with yourself, then ask employees to take it and then see what the gaps are.
Hmm.
Because if just one thing, because of our workplace culture, work is worship culture. When I sold a company, this will tell you kind of the proof in the pudding is if you came and walked around our place of business and talked to, these 150 employees, you know what? You would find the employees would talk as though they own the company and not Bobby Albert. And you cannot buy that stuff. They came to work every day with enthusiasm, with excitement, with a passion. And you just can't buy that kind of stuff because we learn how to tap into the will of the people rather than destroying the will of the people.
Mm. The reason I like that is I've heard you say the word responsibility multiple times, related to our country, related to leadership. And what that's doing is it's pushing down that responsibility, freedom and responsibility down to the absolute lowest level instead of it stopping somewhere along the way. So that's excellent. Well, we're going to include those resources down in the notes. And my guess is if someone wants to connect and do more with you and do some work with you, they can find you on the website and find out what type people you work with, because you do consulting and you help people set all this up, correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, my final question, I gave you a little bit of prep for this. We are Seek, Go, Create. And I'm hearing horns in the background here, so it's getting good and loud here in the RV. But we're Seek, Go, Create. Bobby, you can pick one of those, not all three. I'm going to make you pick one. Which word jumps out at you more than the other two right now? I know it changes, but right now, and
Well,
why?
uh, I think the word go pops out to me because when Jesus was about ready to ascend, into heaven, he said, go and make disciples.
Hmm.
And to me, he gave us our vision statement. And, so that's the reason why the word go uh, means that much to me.
Yeah, I like that. What I really love is talking to people that are great leaders with great wisdom, and how I get different answers from everyone. And I appreciate, because I'm sitting here at times during the interview guessing how they're going to respond. And I must admit, I could see you going with go, because I could tell you're a guy that gets things done, and you're not going to sit around and wait. So Bobby, I've so enjoyed this conversation. You and I need to connect again, I know, and just kind of have a chat and enjoy each other's company, because I know we would. I know that if you've listened in on this, you've enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to ask a big favor of you, and that is wherever you've listened to it, if it's on YouTube, if it's on socials, if it's on a podcast platform, right now, while it's fresh in your mind, share it with someone else, share it with someone that you know that needs to hear this message, either a leader or someone who's moving towards being a leader in any type role, because I believe the conversation applies to people that lead in church situations, the people that lead in business, people that lead in political environments. It all applies. So please share this message. Thank you for listening in. I appreciate Bobby sharing with us today. Until next time, new episodes every Monday. Until next time, continue being all that God created you to be.